I think we can start the program. Mrinal, fine?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you're very audible. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special lecture, the Teachers' Day special lecture today. And through this lecture, we are paying tribute to a visionary because of whom we are all together today. James Mackintosh was a teacher ahead of his time, and Mrinal Kulkarni is going to speak a little bit about him, especially his contribution to the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. James Mackintosh was a public figure well known in England. He was a lawyer and a jurist. And when he came to Bombay, he was made the recorder or King's Judge for Bombay. And during his stint in Bombay, he thought of establishing a society on the lines of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. And thus was born the Literary Society of Bombay on the 26th of November, 1804. His main aim was that this society looks into matters oriental, especially what concerns India. And some of the subjects that he identified, which would be legitimate for the literary society to consider, were geography, anthropology, philosophy, history, languages, and much more. Asiatic society has always been very proud and has benefited from the vision of many people who have led it. 200 years and 200 and odd years down the line, the Asiatic Society was very fortunate to have as its president Dr. Arun Tikekar. And it is because of Dr. Arun Tikekar that the Mumbai Research Center was founded. Amongst the many activities of the Mumbai Research Center was one thing where he wanted that we record the history of the Asiatic Society. And as a result, we had what is called the Founders and Builders of the Asiatic Society, a series of monographs. And it was in this series of monographs that Mrinal Kulkarni wrote on Mackintosh. So this is where Mrinal comes into the picture. A little bit about Mrinal. Mrinal is a multifaceted personality. She has been a teacher at SNDT College. She has done her sociology and anthropology from SNDT College. She has also done a diploma in women's studies from SNDT College. She has taught at the Cathedral and John Cannon High School. She has worked on the news desk for Free Press Journal and Indian Express. She has worked with French anthropologists. Right now, she is doing research on the Maria Gons of Madhya Pradesh. She has written a book with the late M.V. Kamath on the Port Trust and also authored another book on the history of Indian shipping. So Mrinal is someone who is wearing many hats, and I'm sure that she is going to give us a really great evening when she talks about Mackintosh's contribution to the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. Thank you, Mrinal, for being with us and agreeing to give this lecture. All yours now.
Thank you, Shanaz. Good evening, friends. I would like to thank the Asiatic Society of Mumbai and the Mumbai Research Center, in particular, Dr. Shanaz Nalwala, for giving me this opportunity to talk about such an outstanding personality as Sir James Mackintosh on the occasion of Teachers' Day. This is my humble tribute to a great man. I've had a long association with the Asiatic Society of Mumbai and have spent long hours admiring its grand interior, perusing rare books, manuscripts, and other hidden treasures, sometimes a fascinating slice of history, or listening to interesting narratives by old-timers. On one such occasion, I chanced upon a true gem, The Gallery of Excellence, a slim volume on eminent scholars who came out to India and pursued scholarly activities. This led me to the magnificent Darbar Hall, where some of their portraits grace the wall. One portrait in particular caught my attention. Sir James Mackintosh, the founder of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. I stood in awe and wondered how he must have come to a strange country and adapted to its hostile climate, its inhabitants, culture, and varied languages. I then decided to delve deeper into his life and works. The Honorable James Mackintosh was one of the leading figures of his times, a prominent and staunch Whig, a moral philosopher, historian, and jurist. The Scot excelled in all his fields. Over 200 years ago, 217 years to be precise, this extraordinary gentleman, with his brilliant intellect, literary vision, and sharp wit, landed on the Indian soil, hoping to achieve his goal of advancement of knowledge through methods of investigative research in a country which promised great potential. Sir James Mackintosh was the guiding light, the motivator, the advisor, the mentor to all who crossed his path and came under his spell of learning. For the past so many years, until this day, we have been eagerly participating in lectures, talks, seminars, and listening with avid interest to papers being read by eminent scholars and researchers in the hallowed premises of the Darbar Hall of the Asiatic Society. This was only possible through the concerted efforts of this great scholar, who has been the main architect for creating an appropriate platform such as the Asiatic Society of Mumbai to disseminate useful knowledge in varied subjects and hold forth meaningful discourses and dialogues. Ladies and gentlemen, what where would we be here today without his literary vision and a common platform to come together and hold discourses, imploring all scholars and researchers, both young and old, to carry forth this legacy. My talk would be incomplete if I didn't mention another mentor, the late Dr. Arun Tikekar, who spearheaded an initiative to document the literary achievements and scholarly works of all these renowned and as well as little known scholars in the form of monographs, which has added value to the society's collection. To him, I'm greatly indebted. Born in the Scottish Highlands in a small town of Aduri, James Mackintosh was born on October 24th, 1765. He came from a humble background and was the son of a soldier. From a young age, he showed an aptitude to achieve high goals, and his extraordinary proficiency in studies earned him the name Prodigy of Learning. His earlier education was at King's College in Aberdeen. Here he came under the influence of James Dunbar, the professor of moral philosophy, and William Olive, whose work on agrarian society and property rights helped Mackintosh form his views on these subjects during his tenure in India. Ultimately, Mackintosh took a decision to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh, which he completed in 1787. Mackintosh found medicine dull and laborious, requiring knowledge of fundamental facts, which was the basis of science. He was eager to plunge into speculation. As he says, I finally quit college with a little regular and exact knowledge, but with considerable activity of the mind and boundless literary energy. From Aberdeen to Edinburgh and the period thereafter opened new avenues for him. Edinburgh was a city of extraordinary men, a city where reading was fashionable, where ignorance and indolence were more disreputable, where every mind was in a state of fermentation, and the environment throbbing with a zeal for learning. He rubbed shoulders with economic philosophers, theoretical moralists, modern historians, medical teachers, writers, and mathematicians. From a cloistered environment of Aberdeen to intellectual freedom in Edinburgh, Mackintosh transcended into an exciting world of clubs and debating societies. After graduating from Edinburgh as a physician, he returned to the Highlands and thereafter to London. He became seriously interested in literature, moral, political, and speculative philosophy. In view of this, he was determined to abandon the medical profession. During this period, a number of students were influenced by philosophical history, a kind of historical and typical writing of the Scottish Enlightenment, which was followed by professors at Edinburgh. The Scottish writers Alexander Hamilton, James Mackintosh, William Erskine, John Leyden, Alexander Murray, John Crawford, Mount Stuart Elphinston, Edward Vance Kennedys were one of the prominent writers who came to India and wrote. Alexander Hamilton was an officer in the Bengal army and was a Persian scholar. James Mackintosh, of course, we'll know about him in due course of time. William Erskine was a founder member of the Literary Society and the secretary. He was an Orientalist and a historian and wrote on medieval India. John Leyden practiced medicine and was an Indologist. Alexander Murray was a philologist and a linguist. John Crawford, physician and a diplomat and author of the History of the Indian Archipelago. Mount Stuart Elphinston, statesman and historian, governor of Bombay, and wrote the account of history of Kabul. Edward Vance Kennedy was a Sanskrit and Persian scholar and collected manuscripts. He employed a learned munshi to guide him in his Persian studies. All these writers were associated with the Scottish Enlightenment between the years 1784 and 1803, when they came under the influence of Douglas Stuart, a Scottish Enlightenment philosopher and mathematician. They shared the same view as most of the European, that is, a superiority, but not the dogged view of James Mill and Robert Williamson. The Scottish Enlightenment was focused on Edinburgh, where a group of extraordinary men came together to create the most dynamic city on earth. Many of the greatest scientists, artists, philosophers, designers, writers, and economists were working side by side, bouncing ideas and debating their discourses. They were interdisciplinary in their approach and shared two principles: observation and analysis. Edinburgh was the most exciting city to be in and was known as the hotbed of geniuses. Philosophy was the core of the 18th century movement known as Scottish Enlightenment. 18th century Europe was a place for investigation and debate. Scotland took a leading role in this enlightenment. A colossal amount of work was done by Sir James Mackintosh in a short tenure in Bombay, about 7 years, but it was an eventful phase, outlining his immense contribution in various fields, in particular the formation of the Literary Society of Bombay in 1804, of which he was elected the president. His contribution to the Asiatic Society of Bombay, his perception of Bombay and its inhabitants, and the European society, his views on social, political uh, points of view, and his keen observations of the places he visited across the presidency, beyond which enriched his knowledge about India. Drawing from his letters to colleagues and friends and literary figures back home, his contribution to various newspapers in England, his vast repository of political tracts and excerpts of his writing provide insights into a mind which guided some and enlivened others. Mackintosh's interactions with members of the European Society and a few eminent Indians he came across provide a rare discernment of complex situations he was often placed in. Though he had an interesting career in London, the high point of his career was when he received knighthood on his appointment as a recorder of Bombay in 1803, a judicial appointment through the patronage of George Canning. It offered him a salary of £500, followed by a pension thereafter on completion of 5 years of service. Mackintosh hoped his tenure in India would help tide over his financial crisis and guarantee him financial security. Before setting out to India, he envisioned several schemes and plans which were to bear subsequent fruit in the years that followed. His plan to start the Literary Society took root before he left England. He embarked on the Winchelsea with his family in February 1804, full of excitement, apprehension, and trepidation, along with a huge library on board, the contents which he perused throughout his journey. And after a long and tiring journey of 3 months and 13 days, reached the Indian shores at the height of summer on 26th May 1804. Mackintosh had mixed impressions about Bombay. The oppressive heat and its unhealthy and hostile climate took its toll on him. He termed Bombay being situated in the most obscure corner of India. Prior to Mackintosh's arrival, the small English community lived within the ramparts. They felt isolated amidst the Portuguese to the north and south. Minor skirmishes were frequent, although the English had a strong defense and there was always a demand for reinforcements. The recorder's house in the fort was not ready for occupation. When Mackintosh arrived, Jonathan Duncan, the then governor of Bombay, offered him his sprawling bungalow, the official country house in Parel, while he shifted to the fort city. The Mackintoshes lived in this sprawling bungalow till September 1808. The governor's house was formerly a Jesuits' monastery built on the ruins of the Vajranath temple. It was large and airy with magnificent apartments overlooking an expansive garden, which Mackintosh remarks resembled a fine English park. It had two impressive rooms in which he accommodated his vast library. Mackintosh held gala evenings and parties in this sprawling bungalow. It was on that memorial day that a banquet was held in the Darbar Hall, hosted by Jonathan Duncan, and a toast raised at the opening of the Literary Society of Bombay. Later, Mackintosh moved further north to Mazgaon, where he rented a beautiful neoclassical villa, Tarala, built and owned by the Wadia family. So, what was Bombay like when Mackintosh arrived? The European society was full of languor and lethargy. There were a few able and respectable persons, some merchants, military officers, and medical practitioners, and men from the civil service who were well versed in political affairs, whom he considered as potential friends. What he found lacking was persons of profound learning and philosophical pursuits. Lack of intellectual stimulation was a major drawback. In his letters to Sharp, his close friend from the Whig Party and a member of the King's Conversational Club, he implored him to post newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, which back home he would have labeled as trash and trifling, but now considered as an invaluable source of news. Frequent use of words like being alienated, banishment, being in an intellectual desert indicated his longing for intellectual space. Mackintosh arrived in Bombay when the Indian society was going through a period of transition. The company's men were changing their old habits of trading and brokering for those of governors. Factories had become provinces. Instead of being guided by maxims of Indians, which they did previously when they were foreigners and chapmen, they were now the dominant class, dictating their own terms. There were still some who followed the traditional way of thinking. James Mackintosh, who was upright and honest, was not looked upon with a friendly disposition and was unable to conceal his disappointment at the state of things. Mackintosh was aware of the company's rule and extent of corruption following the trial of Warren Hastings, which he was following back in England. He termed the behavior of some members as degenerate. Did Mackintosh see India and those associated with its culture, climate, religion, and methods of governance as a corrupting influence on the Europeans? He was desirous of reforming the colonial society and reiterated that Europe stood for progress. He urged his fellow Europeans to identify with this continent through knowledge, culture, and intellectual pursuits. Having been influenced by the works of William Jones, Charles Grant, and William Robertson on India, Mackintosh had resolved to promote knowledge among the inhabitants of India. He was dismayed to find only a few people interested in literary pursuits and historical research in subjects like philosophy, sciences, arts, literature, and historical research. He realized all those who had come to India in the civil and military capacity were young. Only a few had received scientific and classical education. Their focus on practical education left them little time for higher literary pursuits. A few officers had cultivated the habit of writing, but these were only official reports. As a result, only some had the leisure or the opportunity to enter collateral branches of study like chemistry, botany, mineralogy, and natural history. Mackintosh observed that what little intellectual activity existed was directed towards Orientalism and notes that even in this, we were far behind other settlements. He was convinced that to bring together men who were engaged in similar pursuits was the best mode in kindling their zeal and enabling them mutually to verify the extent of their acquirements. Hence, within a few months of his arrival, and after several deliberations and communications, he called a meeting of some important gentlemen and scholars of Bombay at his house in Parel on 26 November 1804 and founded the Literary Society of Bombay and was elected its president. This was the most outstanding contribution, as the quality of work carried out by the society, both during his tenure and after his departure to England, left an indelible mark on the literary scene in Bombay. What inspired Mackintosh to establish the Literary Society, and what was its purpose? During the period of enlightenment, similar societies were formed by like-minded people known as learned societies. Cultural pursuits took the form of learned societies. This phenomena grew to a large extent in Europe, so much so that many authors, essayists termed these as learned societies as they were known. In the 18th century, learned societies incorporated a number of disciplines, art, science, and humanities. Taking this idea of learned societies forward to a country like India, he saw a great potential for the growth of knowledge, and establishing a literary society was only appropriate. The Literary Society served as a platform for disseminating a wide range of knowledge about India. The society was based upon the principle of equality, and the same could be applied to India for its upliftment. Mackintosh believed that the presence of a European was necessary to bring about improvement. The Englishman in Mackintosh's imagination thus became the embodiment and harbinger of civilization. His letters to Sharp, his close colleague, indicated a distance he had created between himself and members of the Literary Society, whom he imagined closer to India. Now, whether this was a deliberate stand Mackintosh took is debatable. Was it only an intellectual void or a sense of being British and elitist which made him aloof, or was it to prove to his colleagues that intellectually he was still with them in spite of physical distance? This idea persistently played at the back of his mind. In forming the Literary Society, Mackintosh tried to replicate the clubs and societies to which he belonged in England and Scotland, mainly the King's Club and the Speculative Society. He felt that by compiling facts on India, the society would enable better governance of India. Since its members belonged to the upper echelons of society, he considered them to be agents of civilization. But he feared migration of Europeans could lead to degeneracy as they traveled beyond geographical boundaries. The adoption of Indian customs, marriage, and cohabitation with Indian women, resulting in births of mixed race children, questioned European morality. Throughout his memoirs, Mackintosh's need to reiterate his European identity is visible. The desperate need to distance himself from the European community and to reassure his colleagues back home that he was not part of the degeneration that had set in. Mackintosh's outlined the concepts of civilization, Europe and Britain being the epitome. He presented a general outline of all subjects of research. He guided, advised, and encouraged members to pursue subjects like mineralogy, botany, studying recordings of variations in temperature and its impact on the health of the population. To transmit to the depositories of Great Britain every minute species of minerals, vegetables, or animal produce which they thought was new. His program of research based upon science of political economy and collection of statistical information and survey of Bombay city was a pioneering effort. He constantly reviewed the status of each subject. He urged the medical fraternity to observe the changing patterns of weather and climate and maintain a journal. He undertook statistical studies and genealogies, encouraged and promoted the collection of statistical data on population and registration of births and deaths. He studied the structure of the caste system and the origin of different tribes. This helped him make minute observations while traveling to different regions across India. Mackintosh thought highly of the medical fraternity and the information they could give the public, using society as an effective medium, especially against tropical diseases which were unfamiliar to the Europeans. So, also the mode of treatment and new curative methods. The meeting of the Literary Society once a week was a welcome break for Mackintosh. The main objective was to convey to others what to pursue, why they ought to seek knowledge, and how to attain it. He emphasized the need to observe matters from a philosophical point of view. All this was the influence of writings of philosophers like Rene Descartes' Meditation and Objections, Hobbes on Human Nature, to name a few. So also discourses of Machiavelli, Davila, and as observers of human nature and historical compositions had a great influence. Sir James Mackintosh's contribution to the Asiatic Society was immense. Sir John Malcolm commented on his influence and contribution to Oriental literature. At the Literary Society's meeting on 17 July 1811, he lauded his efforts of being actively involved in the advancement of learning. He was aware of the potential of the Eastern world and emphasized the need to showcase India's rich past and the present. By discovering potential of the East, his idea was to contribute the thought and learning of the West. These studies would be either physical or moral, pertaining to the nature of man. The former would include geology, botany, mineralogy, and meteorology of the continent and the seas, while the latter would concern people, their races, languages, history, antiquities, religion, custom, in short, their life and thought. He was aware of the difficulties the country was facing amidst revolution and wars, and exhorted the scholars to come together in literary pursuits. He modeled the Literary Society of Bombay on the lines of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, established by the distinguished Oriental scholar William Jones in 1784. After establishing the Literary Society of Bombay, he set about gathering like minded scholars from different branches of discipline, collecting, collating, and preparing material. They also plan to contribute and discuss papers on the last Monday of each month. The society had two objectives: the intellectual and the social. Its members belonged to a select circle of Europeans who met for the feast of reason and for the flow of the soul. The year 1805 proved a significant as steps were taken to purchase a large collection of books to set up a library. Mackintosh was a man of ideas. He drew up schemes and made invaluable suggestions. It was at his insistence that several works of literary value by scholars in different disciplines was researched, read, and published. This was one of the ways by which collections in varied subjects could be set up. When the society began its activities, there was no journal for publishing its proceedings, nor were there papers read or correspondence conducted. It was only in 1820 that 3 volumes of transactions were published in England. They were read with great interest and were considered reliable and authoritative. Even after the society incorporated with the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland in 1830, and its name changed from the Literary Society of Bombay to the Bombay branch of the Asiatic Society, no journal was published. It was only when Dr. John Wilson became president, he delivered his first address, which was published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal on 27 January 1836, which gave a review of the contributions of the society since its inception. Most of the members contributed to the society's volumes. Mackintosh was keen that the benefits of his achievements should reach everyone. He took delight in guiding others and was always ready to travel and accompany the adventurous. In fact, there was no one who did not fall under his influence and benefit from this rare quality. He was consulted by eminent men from India on their literary projects. It was on his advice that valuable literary works were undertaken by the founding members of the Literary Society. John Duncan's account of the discoveries of the two urns, Dr. Wilson's history of the suppression of infanticide in Western India, Major Edward Moore's lieutenant's little detachment throws light on the geography of the country and the habits of the natives. The Hindu Pantheon was Edward Moore's seminal work. Dr. Robert Drummond published his Marathi and Gujarati grammar. These collections were compiled by local philologists. Major David Price, the Persian scholars, wrote memoirs of the Mohammedan history. Colonel Bowden founded the Sanskrit professorship at Oxford and made considerable progress in Marathi. Captain Jasper Nicholas was the first to record the temperature of the island of Bombay. Dr. Helena Scott, a physician and a literary person known for his scientific researches, he cultivated a superior form of hemp that was used for rope making in the British shipping industry. Charles Forbes took an active interest in improving the social and intellectual life of the people in Bombay. Edward Vance Kennedy wrote on the nature and affinity of ancient and Hindu mythology, which became a classic. Lord Valencia and Henry Salt on the voyages and travel to India and Ceylon. Several other works were held by different scholars in various disciplines. It was apparent that no valuable work was undertaken without his guidance or assistance. Besides promoting knowledge and progress, he attempted to create a conducive environment for European scholars to learn Persian and Sanskrit texts. The contribution of the original members elected to the society afforded a rich and valuable corpus of literary works and set a fine example. Many monuments were also studied for scholarly pursuits with an added interest in inscriptions. In Western India, the cave temples of Ellora, Elephanta, and Canary were examined. Detailed accounts of the Charles Mallet's study of the Ellora caves in 1796 were referred by Mackintosh as a comparative account to his own. He added new perspectives. His interest in the study of different tribes led him to assign the study to other scholars like Captain Williams, who had undertaken an extensive survey in Gujarat on the Jarheja and the Rajput tribe from Kutch and Kathiawar. Mackintosh put forward 3 proposals during the first 2 years of the society's function. First was the plan for comparative vocabulary of Indian languages, dialects, and forms of speech. This plan reflected Mackintosh's keen interest in philology, even though he was an amateur. Since he traveled to different regions across India to gather information on different languages, it helped to throw light on the concept of descent, providing links between various nations of the East. This plan was printed and circulated and later reprinted in the first volume of the Society's Transactions. The objective was to make available a list of words for Indian vocabulary to all the governments of British India and request them to forward copies to all judges, collectors, commercial residents, and magistrates, and procure the corresponding terms in every language and dialect within India and the company's territories and areas beyond them so that their influence may extend further. Mackintosh was lauded for bringing Sanskrit closer to other languages with comparative grammar and general principles of philology. The cultural inheritance of these Scottish writers predisposed them to the study of philology, which was seen as the key to the misunderstanding of the human mind. The history of the early stages of society and study of languages and their relationship was central to access the civilizations of India, past, present, and future. William Jones too advocated comparative philology. The drawback of this method was lack of rigor and its conjunctural method, but they were soon overcome by the new methods of German philology to which Scottish scholars were very receptive. Mackintosh was aware that Indian societies were complex, and the best way to study them would be by applying the method of comparative philology and adopting a philosophical approach. As mentioned earlier, he was greatly influenced by the views of Dugald Stewart and Adam Smith, for whom study of languages was essential part of the philosophy of the mind. Which was a central concern of the Scottish Enlightenment, and the history of the development of language was related to the human mind. For him, understanding the meaning of words held a special interest. Another valuable achievement was proposal for translation of important Sanskrit and Oriental works and its publication. He felt many scholars were qualified to translate from Sanskrit and would come forward if they were assured publication and a moderate remuneration. Mackintosh mentioned the renowned drama Shakuntala, which had made an impact in most European countries. He felt the need to translate work on Hindu literature. There were innumerable treatises on speculative philosophy and ethics, which would be of interest to European philosophers, works on pure and mixed mathematics, and the dates, if ascertained, can determine the antiquity of civilization in a country where they are composed. Once the plan was executed, European scholars would have access to history of Indian science and art, enable them to understand Indian thought. Again, Mackintosh's proposal was implemented much later after his departure. The third proposal that he vetoed was to collect material for the statistical account of Bombay city and island by sending a questionnaire, accounting for the population by recording deaths from the year 1801 to 1808, based on reports handed to police officers on the number of bodies burnt and buried, to study and collect information about the character and morality of India, and contributed several articles to the Asiatic Register providing information. When, after 50 years, 50 years after the Literary Society of Bombay was formed in 1804, Mackintosh had said a limited view of its operations, gradually expanded till it embraced the Eastern world in all its amplitude, in its varied regions, various tribes and languages. Lord Elphinstone said, we now enjoy all the facilities for Oriental study, which the founders of the societies lacked. Sir James Mackintosh, William Erskine, General Vance Kennedy, who were great workers in the field, had neither collections nor manuscripts, nor library nor museum to fall back on. They had to rely on their own resources, find aids to study, and means of enlightening themselves. Mackintosh soon felt the need to set up a library in a systematic way. He realized that its membership was limited to only Europeans, majority of whom was a floating population, which slowed the progress of the society. He undertook to collect standard books best suited for public library and made provisions to acquire new publications every year, depending on the availability of funds. The result was formation of an extensive library with valuable collection, which gave its members the opportunity to further their scholarly pursuits in various disciplines under one roof. Articles by various scholars were added to the collection. Thereafter, the library had collected enough material for conducting new researches and studies and gained from strength to strength and published 3 volumes of Transactions. Mackintosh was aware of the advantages of these researches being easy and open, requiring observation of facts and relating them accurately, unlike antiquarian and philological researches, where references to previous study and access to libraries was necessary. By the year 1810, the library had 2,000 volumes. The society managed to sanction £400 earmarked annually for the purchase of books. The present town hall, colloquially known as Tondal, in the 19th century was not in existence in the year that the Literary Society was formed, and the library was housed in Meadow Street. As the society's activities were expanding, there rose the need to have a separate town hall building. The public too were desirous of having a building for holding meetings and entertainment. Sir James Mackintosh had written a proposal to the government for a grand edifice appropriate for a prosperous settlement, but it was turned down. The building, however, was built 10 years later and was completed in 1833. Till then, the meetings of the society were held at the Bombay Theatre. Sir James Mackintosh was no armchair excursionist. He was adventurous and an intrepid traveler. The excursions he undertook were a significant part of his tenure in Bombay. He travels through different regions, touching the remotest townships and tiniest villages. His observations provided valuable insights and material for his journals, diaries, and letters, and some of his visits were at the invitation of the residents of the court of the Peshwa, Colonel Barry Close at Pune and Captain Sydenham at the court of the Nizam of Hyderabad. He was able to get a first-hand account of the social, economic, and political state of the country, in particularly Pune, where a battle had just concluded with the Scindias and the Holkars. He was able to get first-hand information, and he held discussions with Mount Stuart Elphinstone and John Malcolm when they visited him in Bombay. The impact of famine, customs, rituals of the locals, tribes, the caste system, in particularly the Brahmins, the status of women, administrative reforms, land revenue system, land tenure, art, architecture. From this, he gained much knowledge. Being a high ranking official, he chose Mackintosh was often accompanied by a large entourage of European officials familiar with places. Captain Hamilton of the Bengal Army was an excellent Persian scholar, well versed with the local language. He often acted as Mackintosh's guide and an interpreter. In Thana, he could elicit important information on the civil and religious habits of the Indians. He found Colonel Close, who accompanied him, to be an erudite scholar. They discussed metaphysics and the concept of Maya or illusion. Mackintosh was satisfied that at last he had met his match. Through him, he met several Persian scholars. At the Peshwa's Darbar, he expressed great happiness. The Peshwa too expressed great happiness at meeting Mackintosh, following an alliance with the English and enjoying peace and security, which Mackintosh assured him. He discussed different judicial cases with him. He carefully also examined the role of the police, examined the remains of the capitals of old kingdoms in the Deccan while going from Pune to Bijapur. Mackintosh did not choose to travel the usual way. He always wanted to travel on the off beaten track. He gave detailed descriptions of small villages, towns, structure of Indian societies, and gained significance after he read Colonel Wilkes' historical sketches of South India to trace the history of Mysore. He noticed several things on the way: fortification of towns, which were which actually happened during because of internal strife and famine. He showed keen interest in the working of the panchayats and civil and criminal procedures. A very significant aspect of Mackintosh was giving medical help in exchange for accurate information. On his way to Jesuri, he found a lot of sick people and he who wanted medical treatment. Mackintosh did not have enough medicines in stock, and Colonel Close suggested to him that why not trade medicines or medical help for accurate information. But Mackintosh felt a tremendous drawback because he did not know the Oriental language and he felt that he could not get accurate information. He also studied the languages being spoken, the dialects of the lower castes and upper castes. At Hyderabad, he visited the Nizam Zenana. All these excursions proved that Mackintosh was far ahead of his times in deciphering what should be given to all his scholars in the sense of doing research work. Many of the schemes devised by Mackintosh remained incomplete due to his ill health and impending departure to Europe. But he had the satisfaction of knowing that most of the scholars had started their pursuits in earnest, which would soon bear results. Thus, he returned to England, leaving to the Literary Society an example, an influence, and a memory. There were other scholars like Edward Vance Kennedy, Mount Stuart Elphinston, and John Malcolm, who spearheaded the Society's activities. Contribution came from all quarters. The affluent and the intellectual came together to discourse on many issues. John Malcolm now took a leading role in the society's meetings. Although Indians were still not invited to be members of the society, they did become part of the audiences as well as speakers in the proceedings of the society. Once again, the society thrived. Mackintosh was aware that he was far ahead of his times. Although ill health and lack of intellectual stimulation forced him to return home, he had already sown the seeds of intellectualism in Bombay. In spite of his achievements and contributions in the literary and intellectual fields, he termed his tenure in India a disappointment, but looks back with nostalgia. He thought his appointment in India would be to earn and experience a period of leisure, but soon felt as if in exile from the intellectual world. He continued to suffer from ill health even after he returned to England. A tragic accident occurred when he choked over a tiny chicken bone in the beginning of March in 1832. Although the bone was removed and had no serious consequences, his debility increased, and on 30th May of the same year, he died at the age of 66. He was buried in Hampstead in London. Clearly, his range of work in India testifies his ability to master everything he undertook. Yet so much of his work remained incomplete due to his untimely death. He left behind volumes of historical material, some published during his time and some later. Mackintosh often termed Bombay a remote and secluded settlement, a trading post in the obscure corner of the world. But one wonders what he would have felt 2 centuries later, with Bombay, the urbs prima, being changed to Mumbai, a dynamic and exciting city, haven to ethnic multiplicity, and a throbbing megapolis. As I sat beside his tombstone in Hampstead a few years ago, a wave of nostalgia swept over me, but I'm sure in his heart would have been gladdened to sense an admirer from his adoptive country paying respects. I hope that my small contribution in the form of this monograph will keep his work and memory alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrinal. Ramesh, will you take over the question answer session?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. We participants can unmute themselves and ask the questions. We don't have any in the chat, but there is a lot of appreciation for you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ramesh, can I start with a question?
Sure, ma'am. Please, ma'am.
Mrinal,
Yes.
do we have any details of how the funding was done when they began this whole enterprise?
I came across some of it in the minutes of the meeting which were held, but they have just not quite, sort of given many details about this funding. Probably, I think it would be there, where still large amount of his material is there in the British Library. So maybe one can really access and find out about the funding. But I know for sure that it was not much. And they had to really get donations from the public and affluent citizens.
You did mention about some £400 that was sanctioned.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
purchase
but
books,
that
right?
was hardly enough, to add to such a library. I mean, because considering the vast amount of work that was carried out, that seems a very paltry sum.
Did he donate any of his own books before leaving?
Yes, he did, but they are all in the British Library. Because his main magnum opus was the history of England, and his first book that he published at the age of 26 was Vandicia Gallicia, which was a defense in defense of the French Revolution,
Mhm.
and of course his memoirs. But other than that, they were all pertaining to issues back home, when he was a barrister and when he wrote for the Edinburgh Review. And while he was at the University of Edinburgh, under the influence of all these Scottish writers and Enlightenment scholars.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
Oh,
You can unmute yourselves and
yeah.
ask.
Nrinal, do you think that he felt that if had he been in Calcutta, he may have been, it would have been a more intellectual, stimulating place over there, or did he ever
Yes,
express something like that?
he expressed disappointed at not being appointed as a professor in Calcutta. But yes, I think he would have done better. And he would have got a lot more encouragement, and he would have got that intellectual stimulation which was lacking in Mumbai, because most of the company officers were only interested in the commercial aspect of and making money.
And by the time I think he came to Bombay, the Bengal branch had been well established,
Yes.
It was sort of
Yes.
already doing things, and they had their own journal and
Yes,
things like that. So I guess that would have made a difference,
that's why he was so desperate to model it on the lines of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. But as far as the response went, I don't know whether he could have got anything more than this, which was in a way a substantial amount, because of the scholars that he assigned different literary works. And so I think in a way he would have done better in Calcutta. I don't know, what does everybody think?
No, I think at that point, Calcutta was more vibrant than Bombay.
Yes.
I mean, this is my personal reading, but I think maybe he would have done better there.
Actually, half his time in Bombay went in trying to reform the colonial society. I didn't talk anything about his judicial duties because it was not in the purview of the talk. But even in the judiciary area, he was disappointed, because being an upright, honest judge, many of his cases were looked at and frowned upon. The judgments that he made were really fair and just, but the European society did not think that. So he, as I said, he went home a disappointed man.
You can tell us something about his judgments, ma'am. Any famous cases?
Yeah, his famous cases was that one which comes to my mind is about English gunnery sepoy murdering a Hindu sepoy. Okay, and in the 7 years that he was there, he had never had to, give such a judgment when a sentence and hang him. So Mackintosh actually passed this judgment and wrote down. His hands were literally shaking because he actually in his mind just couldn't believe that this has happened, and but still he was fair, and this whole thing about this English sepoy being hanged in on the Esplanade Road, which I think now we can say it is somewhere near Azad Maidan. It was called the Fasi Talao, and he was hanged there. People from all over the presidency, there were a crowd of 10,000 people just to witness this public hanging. And that was one case. The second was when he himself was a target for murder. There were 2-3 people who conspired to, hatched a plot to murder Mackintosh because of his, honesty, and he didn't toe their line. But that came to light, and he was saved by the skin of his teeth. So there also, he just escaped through, he had a narrow escape. Another important case was regarding William Erskine, who was the founding member of the Literary Society, his secretary, and his son-in-law. Now, William Erskine had misappropriated some funds, and at that time, Mackintosh had just gone back to England, but West was the judge, and he passed the sentence that he should be charged, and he was immediately transferred. But what was the reaction of Mackintosh to his son-in-law? He didn't say a word, and he just nodded, which means that, okay, he deserved what he did.
I think you also said that he was plagued with ill health through
Yes.
much of his stay, wasn't it? In India.
Yes.
His health had suffered.
It was just like all the other English people, the climate did not agree with him. And even in between his court sessions, he would quickly run back home and recuperate and come back for the next session. So I think the climate did not agree with him. But more so, I think it was the lack of intellectual stimulation, because in his memoirs, he kept saying Bombay is an intellectual desert. And he kept saying he's living in exile. So maybe ill health was there, but I think he wanted his own intellectual space.
Wasn't there an uproar against him for passing that judgment on that English sepoy?
There was, but Mackintosh stood his ground, and he was lauded by the grand jury, which comprised mainly Europeans and a few eminent Indians also. So he was really, he really stood his ground, and that is why he was socially an outcast. He didn't have any potential friends because this reflected in his social life also. And that is why he felt aloof. And he wanted to distance himself from the European community, as I said, to to indicate to his colleagues back home that he is not part of them. That he kept on reiterating throughout his memoirs, that he's not part of the degeneration which had set in. So in a way, he was proud of his superior qualities, but at the same time, he was humble. And one important quality that he had was sharing knowledge, which I think we are still doing among our research group, sharing knowledge.
Well, let's hope we have inherited all his good points. And,
yes, and carry his legacy forward.
Right, and as the 50th president of the society,
yes,
I have to be indebted.
You have to take the lead.
And be indebted to him for
yes,
giving us a good start. I mean, this
yes,
sort of honesty and integrity, I think, is something to be appreciative of.
And another thing I would like to share is his tombstone. When I visited, it was in such a dilapidated condition, while the other tombstone about other scholars who were also probably buried there, they were spick and span and clean. And I just wondered, and I asked the caretaker. He said no, because nobody from the Mackintosh family has ever come here to do any kind of cleaning or, sweeping it or laying flowers or wreaths. And well, it was all covered with moss and weeds growing all around. Actually, he had to really clean it and show me the letterings, which had also faded.
Well, that's very sad. Very sad.
Yes. So I guess the Asiatic Society of Mumbai will continue to pay tributes to him in the years to come.
Yes, and when we can afford it, we will go to Hampstead and clean up.
Yes.
Something.
Yes.
You've really done so much work on this, Mrinal. It's admirable how you've collected all this information. Wonderful.
Actually, it's all due to Dr. Tikekar, who really egged me on and encouraged me. He said, go here, go there, get this information, you'll get it here. He was a real
yes,
guide.
He had a fund of knowledge, and again, he was obviously ready to share that, give the guidance that was needed.
I once again want to thank the Asiatic Society of Mumbai and the Mumbai Research Center for really giving me this opportunity to talk about him. Thank you so much.
No, Mrinal, the pleasure was all ours, So I'm so happy that you said yes and agreed to give this talk,
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
And I think for Teachers' Day, it's right to pay tribute to the founder, So
yes.
That's a really good idea, Shanaz.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanaz, so much.
No, thank you, Mrinal. Thank you. Yeah.
You can say good night, I think.
Shanaz, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, once can you please give us an opportunity to know more about the Woods Dispatch anytime in future?
Okay. Okay. Fine. We can ask someone to talk about education in Bombay,
Yes,
So
ma'am.
that would cover up the Woods Dispatch, definitely.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
And we look forward to having you for our program on Wednesday, which is paying once again a tribute to Gail Ombert And this is by Somnath Wagmare. Then during the Ganpati festival, we are going to have every day something done by students, which will be streamed on Facebook. So we thought that during the Ganpati festival, let the students take over, and they are making very interesting presentations on all 10 days of Ganpati. So this is all that is there. And of course, then Ramesh is giving a talk on the men from Bombay who made it to Afghanistan. So, you know, the Monstewart, Elphinston, Alexander Burns, and many more. So this is what we have planned for September.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we'll get the link, no, in the group.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
the links will come on the group.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Minal, ma'am, it was just wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Shall we end the session, ma'am?
Yes, Ramesh. Thank you so much.